In 1961, a courtroom in Jerusalem was bracing itself for the arrival of a monster. The public expected a man with ice in his veins, a dark, looming mastermind who had personally engineered the machinery of the Holocaust. But when the doors opened, they didn't see a demon. They saw a thin, balding man in an ill-fitting suit, adjusting his glasses and nervously tidying his papers. He looked less like a mass murderer and more like a quiet accountant or middle manager worried about a missed deadline. He looked, quite uncomfortably, like anyone's neighbor. As the trial unfolded, the man, Adolf Eichmann, didn't defend his actions with hateful rhetoric or grand ideology. Instead, he spoke the language of a bureaucrat. He described himself as a transportation logistics manager. He explained that he wasn't a designer of the final solution, just its implementer. He didn't care what was in the cargo, whether it was armaments, military parts, or human beings. He just wanted to do a good job. He wanted to please his superiors. He wanted to get an A in efficiency. To Eichmann, the purpose of his work was irrelevant. Only the process mattered. This was the chilling reality that philosopher Hannah Arendt famously called the banality of evil. But the contradiction didn't stop with the man in the glass booth. To get him there, the Israeli Secret Service had to act like the very criminals they were hunting. They didn't go through diplomatic channels or request extradition. They flew to Argentina, kidnapped Eichmann off a street corner, and smuggled him out of the country. It was a flagrant violation of international law and Argentine sovereignty. This creates a haunting paradox that still ripples through global politics today. Is it possible for an act to be completely illegal, yet perfectly legitimate? We see this tension in the bombing of Kosovo and the silence during the Rwandan genocide moments where the law says wait, but the conscience says act. It forces us to ask, when the legal system fails to catch a monster, are we justified in breaking the world's rules to find justice, or are we simply becoming the thing we're trying to stop?
That paradox you just laid out is, it's probably the single most terrifying crack in the whole foundation of modern civilization.
Really, yeah.
We walk around every day assuming that the law and what is right are basically synonyms.
They're the same thing, of course.
We assume the legal code is just morality written down on paper.
Yeah.
But the minute you really look at Eichmann, and then you turn around and look at the spies who kidnapped him, that assumption just completely dissolves.
It does more than dissolve. It feels like the floor drops out from under you. You suddenly realize you can have a scenario where the law is actively protecting the monster.
Right.
And it's criminalizing the person trying to deliver justice. And that's not some weird once-in-a-century exception. When you look at the 20th and now the 21st century, that feels like a feature of the system, not a bug.
It is a feature.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Because you have to understand that systems, especially large-scale legal or bureaucratic systems, are designed for order. They are not necessarily designed for justice. Those are two very, very different metrics.
Order over justice.
Sometimes. The goal is predictability. The goal is stability. Justice can be messy. It can be subjective. Order is procedural.
So for today's deep dive, we're essentially looking at three distinct ways that the human conscience just crashes headfirst into this system.
Exactly. Three different collisions.
We have the guy who hides behind the rules to do evil. We have the guy who has to break the rules to do good. And then, maybe the scariest one.
Yeah.
The person who is just completely lost without any rules at all.
Precisely. And none of them are abstract thought experiments.
No.
These are archetypes we see playing out every single day in every government, every corporation, and frankly, in any large institution you could name.
Let's start with the first one then, the bureaucrat. Because the intro set the stage with Eichmann, but I want to strip away the specific history for just a second and really look at the personality type, because it is frighteningly common.
It is.
So let's picture a man. We can call him the quiet monster, but let's just observe him in his natural habitat. He isn't standing on a podium, screaming about racial purity or grand ideologies. He isn't foaming at the mouth with hatred.
No, not at all.
He wakes up at 6 a.m., he irons his shirt, gets a perfect crease, he kisses his wife and kids goodbye, he commutes to an office that smells exactly like every other office stale coffee and toner. He sits at his desk, and his entire world, his whole moral universe, is defined by two things: the in tray and the out tray.
That's his world.
And he is a conscientious administrator. If you asked his coworkers about him, they'd say he's reliable, he's efficient. He's the guy who stays late to make sure the spreadsheets balance to the penny.
And that right there is the perfect disguise.
But see, here's the question that bothers me. Is it a disguise? I mean, that's what I really struggle with. Because in his own mind, I don't think he's pretending. He genuinely believes that his moral duty is to be efficient.
Yes. The virtue has been replaced.
Right. The actual content of the work. Is he organizing the shipment of grain? Or is he organizing the shipment of human beings? That becomes almost secondary to the quality of his organization. He has managed to completely separate administrative efficiency from moral consequence. He doesn't wake up thinking, I am going to participate in an atrocity today. He wakes up thinking, I need to clear this backlog of transport orders so I don't get a bad mark on my performance review.
You are touching on something absolutely crucial here. You're describing the sociological evolution of evil in a modern technocratic society. We are all conditioned, by movies and books to think of evil as hot.
Passionate,
a crime of passion, a shout of hatred. But in a modern bureaucracy, evil is cold, it's boring, it's a memo with 3 signature lines, it's a spreadsheet.
The boredom of it, that's the part that keeps me up at night. The idea that he wants an A in efficiency. It's like he's still in school trying to please the teacher.
It's worse than school. It's a performance review. And this is where we have to get really precise and make a hard distinction between 2 very different types of thinking. Philosophers and sociologists, they call this the difference between instrumental rationality and practical reason.
Okay, those definitely sound like academic buzzwords. Can you break that down for, real life?
Of course. Let's think of it this way. Think of Google Maps or any GPS app on your phone. You're in your car, you type in a destination. The algorithm calculates the fastest route. Its only goal is to get you from point A to point B in the shortest possible amount of time. That is a perfect example of instrumental rationality.
Okay.
It is a mode of thought concerned strictly, and I mean strictly, with the most efficient means to achieve a given end. It doesn't question the end.
Right. It's the how, not the what or why.
Exactly. It's pure how. Now, imagine that to be the fastest. Your GPS routes you down a quiet residential street at 50 miles per hour, right past a school zone as kids are getting out, and then through a protected nature reserve, tearing up the ground. Does the algorithm care?
No. It just sees a clear path.
It doesn't care at all because the algorithm is incapable of asking, should I go this way? Is this route morally acceptable? It only asks, is this the fastest way? That's instrumental rationality. Pure logic with a moral filter completely removed.
Got it. So what's the other one? Practical reason.
Practical reason, or what the sociologist Max Weber called value rationality, is the human ability to stop the car, look at the GPS, and say, wait a minute, is this destination even worth going to? And is this route morally okay? It's the part of our brain that weighs the values of an action, not just its efficiency.
And you're saying bureaucracies are designed to kill that part of our brain?
They are engines of instrumental rationality. They are designed from the ground up to strip away practical reason. Why? Because practical reason slows things down. It creates friction. If every employee on an assembly line stopped to ask, is the product we're making ethically sound? The entire line would grind to a halt.
So conscience is a bottleneck.
Yes. From the system perspective, conscience is inefficiency. It's a problem to be solved. And this isn't just a theory. A brilliant sociologist named Zygmunt Bauman, who survived the war in Poland, he argued this point so aggressively. He said the Holocaust was not some aberration of modernity. It wasn't a flashback to some primitive barbaric age.
What was it then?
It was the result of modernity. It was the logical conclusion of what happens when you perfect the modern bureaucracy. He actually laid out 3 specific conditions that allow this bureaucratic evil to flourish, and I guarantee you will recognize them from the modern corporate world.
Okay, lay them on me.
The first, and maybe the most important, is authority. The system has to successfully substitute moral responsibility with simple obedience. When Eichmann stood up in that court and said, I was just following orders, he wasn't just, making a cheap excuse. He was expressing the core internal reality of a bureaucrat.
He actually believed it.
He believed it. In that system, the definition of morality gets twisted. It's redefined as doing what you are told. If you disobey an order because your conscience tells you to, the system doesn't see you as a hero. The system defines you as the bad guy. You are insubordinate. You are a problem employee.
I see this constantly, maybe not with genocide, obviously, but in business. A boss says, sell this product, you know the product is garbage. Maybe it even hurts people. If you object, you're not a team player. You get managed out. The good employee is the one who finds a way to sell the garbage efficiently.
Exactly. The organizational hierarchy replaces your personal conscience. That's condition 1. The second condition is routinization. This one is so insidious. You have to make the violence or whatever the harm is mechanical. You break it down into 1,000 tiny rule-governed steps.
So you're not killing people.
No, of course not. You're writing memos about supply chain logistics. You're attending conferences on population density management. You're making phone calls about train schedules and fuel allotments.
It's fragmentation. It's breaking the act down into such small pieces that no one person feels responsible for the whole thing.
That's it.
If my only job is to stamp the paper that authorizes the fuel for the truck, I'm not killing anyone. I'm just an administrator doing my job. The guy driving the truck, he's just a driver. The guy loading the truck is just a logistician. No single person has to feel the weight of the whole crime.
Precisely. The responsibility is pulverized into dust so no one has to carry the brick. It's genius in a monstrous way. And that leads to the third condition, which is dehumanization. This is the psychological safety valve that makes it all possible.
Turning people into numbers.
Into objects. You must treat human beings as non-human entities. When you read the internal Nazi documents, they're not talking about families or children. They're talking about cargo, units, pieces, or statistics that need to be processed.
It's abstraction. It's jargon.
It solves the moral conundrum of killing. It's psychologically very, very hard to kill another human being when you see them as human. It is very easy to liquidate a surplus of inventory or solve a logistical problem. If you change the words, you change the mental state of the person doing the job.
This connects directly to something else we were looking at, the concept of the street-level bureaucrat. Because Eichmann was a high-level manager, but this same logic has to apply to the people on the ground too, right? The guards, the clerks.
Absolutely. Michael Lipsky coined that term, street-level bureaucrat.
Yeah.
He wasn't even studying the Holocaust. He was looking at everyday public servants. Teachers, police officers, social workers.
The people who actually interact with the public.
Right. And what he found was that these people are almost always completely overwhelmed. They have huge caseloads, they have very limited resources, and they're bound by incredibly rigid rules from above. So to survive the day, just to get through the pile of files on their desk, they have to develop shortcuts. They engage in stereotyping or routine processing. They stop seeing clients as individual people with unique stories and start seeing them as files to be closed.
It's a coping mechanism.
It is. But when you combine that burnout, that sort of necessary dehumanization, with a state mandate to do something truly terrible, you get a nightmare.
And we've seen this play out in our lifetime. This isn't ancient history. The notes mention the Xinjiang papers.
It is a stark, terrifyingly modern parallel. When you read the leaked internal directives from the Chinese government about the internment of the Uyghur Muslims, the language is aggressively, almost clinically bureaucratic.
They're not saying let's commit cultural genocide.
No. The state doesn't say, we are going to lock up 1 million people and erase their culture. They say they're conducting vocational training. They are establishing re-education centers.
Vocational training, it sounds like a community college program. It's benevolent, it's helpful.
That is the power of the euphemism. It allows the person who is running the camp, the guard on the wall, to tell themselves a story about what they're doing. We're not prison wardens, they're educators. They're not destroying a people, they are maintaining stability. They are bringing order to a restive population. The really terrifying reality is that the people enforcing these policies likely view themselves as good, patriotic citizens.
They're doing their jobs.
They're doing their jobs and doing them well. They are exercising pure instrumental rationality.
It really makes you want to look at your own job description, whatever it is, and read the fine print. It forces you to ask that bigger question. What is the actual final end result of the task I'm doing? Not just, did I meet my quarterly KPI?
And that question, that requires practical reason, which is hard work. It requires reflection. It often requires courage.
Which brings us to the perfect flip side of this. Because if the bureaucrat is the person who follows the rules to do evil, what happens when you have to break the rules to do good?
We started with this idea that the law isn't always moral. So does that mean that sometimes to be moral, you have to be illegal?
This is the realm of the interventionist, and it is an absolute legal and moral minefield.
Let's go to a specific moment in time. Let's call it the pilot's dilemma. I want you to transport yourself to a rain-slicked runway somewhere in Italy late at night in 1999. There's a commander, a pilot, staring at the cockpit of a fighter jet.
I can see it.
He knows that just across the Adriatic Sea, in a small village in Kosovo, paramilitary forces are moving in. The intelligence is clear. He knows that by morning, if nothing is done, that village is going to be a graveyard. But he also knows something else, something that's tying his hands. The United Nations has not authorized a strike.
The Security Council is paralyzed. Exactly. Russia, China, they're blocking it. International law says, the law says respect the sovereignty of that nation.
And every moral instinct, every fiber of his conscience is screaming, Move.
Right. So he makes a choice. He climbs into that jet. He takes off without official authorization. He flies across the sea, and he drops the bomb that stops the advance of those forces. In that moment, he has committed an act that is technically a war crime. It's a violation of international law. He has violated the sovereignty of another nation, but he saved everyone in that village.
He's a criminal and a hero at the same instant.
I remember reading interviews from commanders in that conflict, and the sentiment was just so heavy. These pilots, these leaders, they half expected to be court-martialed or at the very least publicly condemned, but they said they couldn't live in a world where the law was a suicide pact for innocent people.
That pilot you're describing is the absolute embodiment of the illegal but legitimate paradox.
See, that phrase just breaks my brain every time I hear it. Illegal but legitimate. How can an act be both of those things at the same time?
It sounds like a complete contradiction in terms. But in the world of international relations, it is a very specific, very real category. The Independent International Commission on Kosovo, which was a body set up after the war, released a report with that exact conclusion. They looked at the entire NATO bombing campaign and said the intervention was illegal, but it was legitimate.
Okay, you have to unpack that for me. Let's start with the first part. Why was it illegal?
It was illegal because it flew directly in the face of the UN Charter. The Charter is the foundational document of the modern world order, and it is crystal clear. You cannot use military force against another state unless it is in self-defense, or it is explicitly authorized by the UN Security Council.
And the Kosovo bombing was neither.
It was neither. There was no Security Council resolution because Russia and China were guaranteed to veto it to protect their ally, Serbia. So by the letter of the law, the very rules the world agreed to after World War II to prevent this kind of thing, NATO was acting as a criminal aggressor.
Okay, so that's the illegal part, but they still call it legitimate. Why?
Yes. They argued it was legitimate because it was the only way to stop a massive humanitarian catastrophe. Ethnic cleansing was happening on the ground. People were being systematically murdered. The commission argued that the moral imperative to stop an ongoing genocide outweighed the procedural requirement of getting a UN vote first.
This feels like the classic trolley problem, but on a global scale. You have to break the rule, violate sovereignty to save the people on the tracks. But why did they feel they had to do it then? Was it just about Kosovo, or was it a reaction to something that happened before?
Oh, it was entirely about the ghost of Rwanda. You mentioned the silence during the Rwandan genocide in the opening. That was only 5 years prior, in 1994. And in that case, the world followed the rules perfectly.
To the letter.
To the letter. The Clinton administration, the UN, the European powers, they spent weeks, literally weeks, debating the legal definitions.
Yeah.
Is it technically a genocide yet? Or is it just a civil war? Do we have a legal mandate to intervene? The sources from the Times say they were just wringing their hands in meeting rooms in Washington and Geneva.
And while they were debating the proper legal term, 800,000 people were being hacked to death with machetes.
Exactly. That is the price of absolute adherence to the law when the law itself is paralyzed. So the illegal but legitimate doctrine that emerged from Kosovo was essentially the world's major power saying, we cannot let that happen again. From now on, in extreme cases, we will ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
But that opens a massive Pandora's box, doesn't it? Because if we establish a principle that sovereignty doesn't matter if you're doing bad things, who gets to decide what bad things are and when it's bad enough to justify an invasion?
You've just hit on the core problem of international law for the last 70 years. It's the Lotus Doctrine problem.
The Lotus Doctrine? What's that?
It's a foundational principle that comes from a case back in the 1920s. But it basically established the idea that states are free to do whatever they want inside their own borders unless there is a specific, explicit international rule prohibiting it. It's the old traditional view of sovereignty. The king is the absolute master of his own castle. If the king wants to starve his peasants or persecute a minority, that's the king's business, and the neighboring king has no right to interfere.
But the intervention in Kosovo challenges that head on. It says, no, actually, if you're starving your peasants, we reserve the right to kick down your door.
It does. It tries to replace that old idea with a concept of popular sovereignty. This is a much more modern idea that sovereignty doesn't actually belong to the regime or the dictator. It belongs to the people of that country. The state is just the trustee of that sovereignty.
Like a government is managing an account on behalf of the people.
A perfect analogy. So if a state turns around and attacks its own people, if it starts committing genocide, it has violated that trust. It has effectively fired itself. It forfeits its right to the shield of sovereignty.
I really like that idea in principle. It means a dictator can't just hide behind the phrase national sovereignty as a cover for mass murder. But I can immediately see the dark side.
It's a huge risk.
If I'm a powerful country and I want to invade a weaker country for its oil, I can just manufacture a pretext. I can claim, oh, they're committing human rights abuses. I'm not invading. I'm conducting a legitimate humanitarian intervention. And suddenly, my illegal invasion is reframed as legitimate.
That is the constant danger. It makes international law dangerously subjective. But believe it or not, there is an even darker and more confusing twist to all of this. We've talked about acts that are illegal but legitimate. Have you considered the opposite? Interventions that are perfectly legal but illegitimate.
Wait, so following all the rules, having all the right paperwork, but still being completely in the moral wrong, how is that even possible?
Precisely. Look at the Syrian civil war and specifically the Russian intervention there. This is the perfect, terrifying mirror image of Kosovo.
Okay, explain that.
Under international law, there's a principle called the effective control doctrine. It basically means the recognized government is whoever has effective control of the state's capital and institutions. So, in the case of Syria, even though Bashar al-Assad was bombing his own cities, even though he had lost control of huge swaths of the country to rebels, he still held Damascus and the seat at the UN.
So legally, on paper, he's the boss.
Legally, he is the sovereign, which means when he officially invited Russia to send in its military, its troops, and its bombers to help him crush the rebellion, that action was perfectly legal under international law. It was an intervention at the invitation of a valid, recognized government.
But it was completely illegitimate.
Most human rights organizations and a huge portion of the world would say yes. It was illegitimate because that legal intervention was used to prop up a regime that was committing atrocities against its own population. So you have this insane situation where in Syria, the law protected the monster because he had the right stamp on his invitation letter, while in Kosovo, the law would have protected the monster, so the good guys had to break the law.
That is maddening. It basically says the law is designed to protect whoever is currently holding the biggest gun in the capital city.
That is the effective control doctrine in a nutshell. Whoever holds the gun and controls the territory is the government, period. There are some legal scholars now who are desperate to shift this. They want to move the entire basis of international law from a standard of effective control to one of effective protection.
Effective protection. So the government is only the government if it's protecting its people.
The idea is that you only possess the rights of a legitimate government if you are actively protecting the people you govern. If you fail to protect them, or worse, if you actively attack them, you lose your legal standing. You can no longer claim sovereignty or legally invite foreign troops to help you kill your own citizens. It's a radical attempt to force the legal map to match the moral territory.
But until an idea like that becomes law, we are stuck in this impossible gray zone. We have the bureaucrats who can follow the law to do evil, and we have the pilots who have to break the law to do good.
It's a fundamental crisis.
But there is a third person in this whole story. We've looked at the managers and the masterminds, the commanders and the pilots. I want to look at the foot soldier. The person who isn't an evil genius and isn't a maverick hero. They're just empty.
This is, to me, the most tragic figure of all. The one born out of the system itself.
Let's go to a different scene entirely. Not a courtroom in Jerusalem or a runway in Italy. Go to a dying industrial town in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place where the big factory rusted shut 20 years ago. The church is half empty. The community center is boarded up. And I want you to picture a young man living there. He has no real family structure to speak of, no mentors, no close community, no tradition. He is just floating in a social vacuum.
Completely disconnected.
He gets a job. It's at some kind of high security processing center. Maybe it's a private prison. Maybe it's a deportation facility. Maybe it's something even worse. And for the first time in his entire life, someone hands him a thick bound manual. It says standard operating procedures on the cover. He puts on a crisp uniform. He gets a title. And suddenly, he isn't just a driftless kid from a dead-end town anymore. He is an officer. He has a role. He has a purpose.
He has found a container for his life, a structure.
Exactly. And the scary part is, I was reading about this archetype, and the report described how this young man, this amoral implementer, he would sign cruel orders, process people through a brutal system without a single tremor in his hand. Not because he hated the people he was hurting. He probably didn't even think about them as people. He did it because the institution was the only parent he had ever known. He loved the rules because the rules saved him from being nobody.
You are describing a profound sociological crisis. What you're talking about is the direct intersection of Emil Durkheim's concept of enemy and the psychological profile of the authoritarian follower.
I've heard that word enemy before. I always just assumed it meant, lawlessness or total chaos, riots in the street.
That is the common mistranslation, and it misses the whole point. We often think an enemy means no norms or no rules. But Durkheim, who is really one of the fathers of sociology, he meant something much deeper, much more internal. The better translation is derangement, or more specifically, a lack of regulation.
A derangement of what, though?
A derangement of human desire. Durkheim's view was that human beings, left to their own devices, have bottomless desires. We are biological creatures who always want more. More food, more status, more money, more power. It never ends. In traditional societies, your community regulated that desire for you.
How so?
Your village, your priest, your extended family, they provided the guardrails. They would tell you, this is enough. You're a good farmer. You have a respected station in life. Be content. They put a psychological cap on your anxiety and ambition.
So the community acted like a governor on an engine. It stopped you from redlining and blowing up.
A perfect metaphor. But enemy is what happens when those social and moral guardrails completely vanish. When society stops telling you it is enough and instead starts screaming at you, the sky is the limit. When those traditional bonds dissolve, the individual falls into what Durkheim called a bottomless abyss of frustration. You never know if you're successful enough. You're constantly anxious, constantly comparing yourself to others, constantly looking for validation.
And this connects to the young man in the uniform because he's desperately looking for someone, anyone, to give him those guardrails back.
He is desperate for them. And this ties into another key idea from a German sociologist, Ferdinand Tönnies. He talked about the great historical shift from Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft.
Okay, my German's non-existent. You're going to have to help me out there.
Of course. Gemeinschaft basically translates to community. It's the old world. It's organic, traditional. It's a society based on friendship, kinship, shared morals, shared religion. You help your neighbor because he's your neighbor, and you've known his family for generations.
Okay, so Gemeinschaft is the village. What's the other one?
Gesellschaft translates to society. It's the modern world. It's mechanical, rational, impersonal. It's a society based on contracts, laws, and individual self-interest.
So we move from a world of I know his mom, so I'll help him, to a world of I have a legally binding contract with this limited liability corporation.
Precisely. And Tönnies observed something really chilling about this transition. He argued that the rational state, the Gesellschaft, actually holds a kind of veiled hatred toward traditional community, the Gemeinschaft.
Why would it hate community?
Because the state wants individuals to be atomized, to be disconnected from each other, like individual atoms floating in space. That way, they depend entirely on the state for their rules, their identity, and their sense of security. The state doesn't want your loyalty to be to your family or your church. It wants your primary loyalty to be to the state itself.
That's a terrifying thought. The state wants you to be lonely, so you'll be obedient.
In a way, yes. And that is the mechanism that creates the amoral implementer. If you are one of these atomized individuals, if you don't have a Gemeinschaft, a real thick community telling you what is right and wrong from birth, where do you get your morality from as an adult?
You get it from the employee handbook, from the standard operating procedures.
You get it from the institution. In an atomized society, people lack an internal moral compass that's derived from love and tradition and shared values. So they turn to the bureaucracy, the state, the corporation, the army, to provide an external compass.
And that's why the young man signs the cruel order without flinching.
He signs it because following the rule makes him feel safe. It gives him structure. It makes him feel like a good person within the only context he understands, which is the system he works for. The immense danger is that he has no leverage, no external viewpoint from which to critique the system's rules. If the institution says, load these people onto the train, he does it. Not out of malice, and this is so important, not because he is a bad man, but because without the institution's rules, he is falling back into that abyss of meaninglessness. He becomes the clinical implementer.
It's tragic. We usually want to demonize these people to see them as monsters, but what you're describing is a person who is a victim of a broken society long before they become a perpetrator in a broken system.
They're looking for a sense of belonging in a machine that is fundamentally incapable of love or providing real meaning.
This also feels like it connects to the particularly American obsession with success. There was a mention in the notes of something called Merton's strain theory. How does that fit in?
So Robert Merton, another sociologist, argued that the United States is a highly anomic nation. And he asked why. His answer was that our culture places a massive, almost singular emphasis on certain goals, specifically wealth, status, success, the whole American dream package.
Right. Everyone is told they can and should be a millionaire.
Exactly. But at the same time, the social structure severely restricts the legitimate means to actually achieve those goals for a huge portion of the population. Yeah. The game is either rigged or just incredibly hard. This creates a massive societal strain between the goals everyone is told to want and the means they actually have.
And people react to that strain.
They react in predictable ways. Some people become what Merton called innovators. They still want the goal of wealth, but they use illegitimate means to get it. They become criminals. They rob a bank. But another group becomes what he called ritualists.
Ritualists.
These are people who, on some level, have given up on ever achieving the big goal of success. They know they'll never be rich or famous, but they cling obsessively, almost religiously, to the means, to the rules and procedures. They become the bureaucrat who won't bend a single policy to help a dying man because following the policy correctly is the only thing they have left. They've lost the dream, so now they worship the rule book.
Wow, that hits hard. It explains so much of the petty tyranny you see in everyday life. The person at the DMV or in HR who screams, "It's policy," while watching a disaster unfold in front of them. They aren't evil, they're just clinging to the wreckage of a dream.
That's a very good way to put it.
So let's try to pull the camera back here and connect these threads. We have three distinct stories, three archetypes. We have the bureaucrat, the Eichmann figure, who builds the machinery of harm using pure instrumental rationality. We have the interventionist, the pilot over Kosovo, who reveals that massive gap between what is legal and what is legitimate, forcing us into an impossible choice between order and justice. And then we have the anomic foot soldier, the young man in the uniform who provides the willing manpower for the bureaucrat because he is so desperate for a sense of belonging in a shattered, atomized society.
They're all symptoms of the same deep structural disease. They all point to what the philosopher Jürgen Habermas called a legitimation crisis.
A legitimation crisis. That sounds like the final boss of this entire discussion.
It kind of is. Habermas's big argument was that the modern state runs on what he called rational systems. The economy, the welfare system, the legal code. It's all very efficient, very technical.
Yeah.
But in the process of building this efficient machine, the state has used up and depleted the cultural traditions, the morality, the religion, the deep community ties that used to be the source of meaning in people's lives.
So it's like we built a really, really great engine, the modern state, but we completely ran out of the fuel needed to power it.
We ran out of moral fuel, the meaning-making fuel. Habermas calls the result a motivational crisis. The system, the state, it demands our loyalty. It demands that we work hard, follow the rules, pay our taxes, be good citizens. But the sociocultural system no longer supplies the why. Why should I be good? Why should I sacrifice for my neighbor? Why should I care about the common good?
The system itself can't answer that question. The system can only say because it's the law or because it's efficient.
And because it's the law is not a good enough answer when the law is telling you to do something terrible, or when the law is failing to stop something terrible from happening. We're left with these incredibly efficient machines and these incredibly complex legal codes, but a giant moral vacancy right at the center of our society.
And nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. That vacancy will be filled by something. It can be filled by a retreat into radical ideologies. It can be filled by a strongman leader who promises to restore order and meaning by force. Or it can be filled by the mindless, soul-crushing bureaucracy that Adolf Eichmann came to represent.
It really feels like we've come full circle. We built these massive systems law, bureaucracy, the state, to save us from chaos, to save us from what Hobbes called the war of all against all. But without a moral core, without that practical reason to steer the ship of instrumental rationality, these very systems that were meant to save us can become instruments of chaos themselves, just a colder, more organized, more efficient kind of chaos.
They do. And that's why the solution isn't just writing better laws or improving our processes. The solution has to be about rebuilding the human capacity for moral judgment. It's about creating a society where when the rule book says harm this person, the human being reading it still has the internal fortitude and the community support to say no.
It's a very heavy takeaway because we're so conditioned to think that the breakdown of society looks like riots. We think it looks like fire in the streets and people breaking all the rules.
But that's the distraction. That's the loud, obvious collapse. I want to leave the listener with this final thought because it's the one that haunts me far more than any image of a riot.
Go ahead.
We tend to think of the breakdown of society as people rioting in the streets. as people breaking the rules. But what thinkers like Durkheim and Arendt suggest is that the real deeper danger might be the exact opposite. The true collapse happens when we follow the rules so perfectly, with such technical precision and efficiency, that we forget what the rules were for in the first place. The scariest person in the world isn't the one burning down the building. It's the one in an office quietly signing the paperwork to have it condemned, simply because the form was filled out correctly.